He burned my letters, so I burned his empire. That's not a metaphor. That's my story. Before I tell it, if you've ever loved someone so deeply that their silence could shatter you, stay with me. And if this story stirs something, sadness, anger, or the quiet ache of recognition, support this channel. Hit subscribe, share it, keep these stories alive. Because love isn't always gentle, sometimes it demands witnesses. My name is Elena Hart, 31 years old, and until last year I believed I'd already lived the great love of my life. It began in the simplest way, through words on paper. He was Nathan Cole, a novelist turned tech visionary, the kind of man who made a room lean toward him when he spoke. I met him before the headlines, before the fame, when he was just a writer renting a single-room flat above a bookstore. I worked in publishing, fresh from graduate school, living on caffeine and overdue rent notices. Our first exchange wasn't romantic, it was professional. He'd sent in a manuscript so heavy, with red ink that I joked it looked wounded. He laughed, then wrote back, "Then be it surgeon." That line started everything. Emails became calls, calls became late-night walks through the city. We'd talk about stories, about the strange beauty of imperfection, about how people break and mend. He told me he didn't believe in coincidence. I told him I didn't believe in endings. Together, we wrote ourselves into something fragile and real. Nathan loved letters. Real ones, ink, paper, scent. Every time he traveled, he'd send one. No texts, no emails, letters. They arrived with postmarks from Berlin, Kyoto, Buenos Aires. Each began the same way, for the days when distance feels louder than love. I kept them all in a cedar box lined with navy silk. They smelled like dust and memory, like something worth saving. Whenever life grew too loud, I'd open the box, reread them, and remember why I stayed. 5 years passed. His writing career faded into something larger. He built a digital publishing empire that promised to give stories back to the people. Investors came, suits came, and so did the change. He started speaking in numbers instead of sentences. The man who once mailed words now mailed contracts. Still, I believed in us. I thought success was just another chapter. But somewhere along the line, I realized I was living beside a stranger who still wore the same face. It started small. Missed dinners. Cold replies. The sound of a locked office door at midnight. He'd tell me, "It's business, Elena. You wouldn't understand." But I did understand. I understood that every time he looked at his reflection, he saw a man being rewritten, polished, published, untouchable. And in that reflection, there was no space left for the woman who had believed in the first draft. One night, I came home early from a conference. The house was too quiet. From his office came the faint crackle of a fireplace. He never lit fires, he hated the smell of smoke. I walked in and froze. On the marble hearth lay the cedar box. Its silk lining smoldered, ashes curled in the air like dying moths. He stood over it, expressionless, watching the letters burn. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then I asked, "Why?" He didn't look at me. He simply said, "Because I don't need reminders of who I was." The flames ate the last paper corner, the inked words I once believed would outlive us. In that moment, something inside me burned too, but colder, cleaner. I didn't cry. I just stared at the fire until it was only embers. Then I turned away and said quietly, "Neither do I." He went back to his desk, typing, as if nothing had happened. I left the room, walked to the balcony, and let the night air cut through the smoke in my hair. That was the night our love ended. Not with a fight, but with the sound of paper turning to dust. What he didn't know, what no one knew, was that I'd spent the last year handling the company's communications, overseeing every contract, every PR statement, every trademark. I had access to everything. Because trust had always been the foundation of his empire. And that night, standing in the scent of burnt ink, I realized trust was the easiest thing to weaponize. I didn't plan revenge immediately. Grief came first, sharp, humiliating, endless. Days blurred into nights, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw smoke. But grief has a strange way of clarifying things. It strips away the unnecessary. And when the noise of heartbreak finally faded, what remained was focus. I started reading again, his contracts, not his letters. Every clause, every acquisition, every signature he'd dismissed me from. The empire he built was paper too, layers of filings, legal loopholes, investors he'd promised more than he could deliver. It could burn just as easily. He had destroyed our history because it made him feel powerful. I would destroy his power by using what he left me, his trust, his arrogance, his belief that I was harmless. And so the fire began again. This time, in silence. Not of flames, but of intention. They say heartbreak fades. But betrayal leaves an imprint, a kind of quiet echo that never really stops ringing. After I burned the last of his letters, something changed in me. I didn't cry anymore. I didn't scream. I just started to listen. To everything he'd ever said that didn't add up. I'd spent years helping him build that empire. Every gala, every meeting, every strategic decision, he'd stand on stage and talk about vision, legacy, innovation. But I was the one writing his speeches at 2 a.m., while he was busy rehearsing lies in another woman's apartment. People thought he was a genius. I thought so too, once. Until I realized geniuses don't need to lie to win, they only lie when the empire they built is rotten at the core. It started with a spreadsheet. A single cell, colored red. I remember the day clearly. Rain on the window. Coffee gone cold beside me. The company accountant had sent the report for final review, same as always. But the numbers didn't align. A few transactions missing. A few amounts shifted. Nothing major, just enough to pass unnoticed if you weren't looking closely. And the account name? ES Holdings. My initials, Elena Stone. Only. I never created any company in my name. I checked the registration. It was foreign. Offshore. Hidden behind layers of shell corporations. And the signature on the founding document. His. My husband's. He'd built a ghost company using my name. And he'd been funneling money through it for nearly 3 years. I stared at that screen for an hour. My hands were shaking. It wasn't even the money that made me sick, it was the familiarity of it all. The same pen stroke. The same phrasing I'd seen in hundreds of contracts we'd signed together. He didn't just betray me. He used me as camouflage. I didn't confront him. Not yet. When someone lies that well, confrontation is just a warning shot. And I wasn't about to warn him. So, I started documenting. Emails. Contracts. Invoices. Internal memos. Every time he smiled at me across the boardroom table, I took another note. I created a private drive, encrypted, hidden under a decoy file labeled vacation photos. And then I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Marcus Kane, a journalist who once covered our company's early days. We used to joke that he'd write the story of our success someday. Now, I was asking him to write the story of its destruction. Marcus, on phone. Elena? Jesus, it's been forever. You sound different. Elena. I am different. I need your help. But this story doesn't go live, not yet. Not until I say so. Marcus. You're talking about him, aren't you? Elena. I'm talking about what he built on other people's trust, including mine. For the next 3 months, Marcus and I worked in secret. He dug through archives. I sent him files under anonymous emails. Every transfer led to another company, another holding, another lie. And the deeper we went, the clearer it became, this wasn't just financial deceit. It was strategic fraud. He'd been embezzling investor funds, creating false subsidiaries, and hiding the losses behind charities we founded together. The irony. Those charities were meant to empower women in business. And yet, the man leading them was exploiting the one closest to him. It all came to a head one night. Late, he called, asking me to bring some files to his office, urgent. I knew what that meant. He'd found something. Maybe one of the traces I'd left behind. When I walked in, he was standing by the window, back turned. The city lights flickered against his reflection, that same posture he used every time he rehearsed for public appearances. But this time, there was no audience. He turned around and said, "Elena, you've been busy." There was a pause long enough to choke on. And then, he smiled. Not the soft kind. The calculated kind. He slid a printed folder across the table, screenshots of my emails to Marcus. "You always were clever," he said. "Just not clever enough." For a second, I thought it was over. I thought he'd destroy me before I ever got to finish what I started. But what he didn't know was that I already had backups. And I'd already shared them with someone who had more power than both of us combined. That night, before walking into his office, I'd sent a secure drive to his investors. Everything. The shell companies. The money trails. The false reports. When he realized what I'd done, it was already too late. He said nothing for a long time. Just stood there, jaw tight, breathing heavy. Then finally, he whispered, "You burned everything." And I said, "No, darling. I lit it up. There's a difference." The fallout was swift. Overnight, the empire began to crumble. Headlines appeared everywhere: Stone Industries under federal investigation, CEO implicated in offshore scandal. He tried to spin it. Claimed he was the victim of a data breach. But the documents were undeniable. His signature, his accounts, his greed, all out in the open. I didn't watch the coverage. I stayed home, lights off, wrapped in the same blanket I'd used to read his letters once. Somewhere out there, the man who thought he owned the world was watching it burn, piece by piece, paper by paper. And all I felt was stillness. Not revenge. Not relief. Just stillness. Like standing in the ashes of something that never should have existed. They say power corrupts. But love blinds you long before power ever does. And I had been blind for far too long. That night, I opened my laptop and drafted a single email to Marcus. The subject line said, "Publish it." Within hours, the article went live. And the world finally saw the man I'd married, not as a visionary, but as a fraud. His empire didn't fall because I exposed him. It fell because he built it on deceit. I just gave gravity a little push. When the story broke, people called me a hero. They called me brave. They called me dangerous. But none of those words felt right. Because heroes sleep at night. And for months, I didn't. I'd wake up to the sound of my own name, whispered on television, printed in headlines, dissected by strangers. They didn't care about the truth. They cared about the spectacle. The wife who exposed the billionaire. The woman who torched an empire. They made it sound poetic. But it wasn't poetry. It was consequence. And in every consequence, there's a price. 3 days after the article went live, I couldn't leave my apartment. Reporters camped outside. Former employees sent messages, some thanking me, some accusing me of destroying their futures. Even Marcus, the journalist I'd trusted, said the public wanted a face, not just a name. But I wasn't ready to be a face. I was still trying to remember who I was beneath all of it. For 14 years, my life had been defined by us. Every decision, every headline, every introduction started with Elena and Charles. And now, it was just me. I thought about leaving the city. Disappearing. But then, the letters came. Hundreds of them. Women, men, even former employees, writing about their own betrayals. Their own empires that had quietly burned from within. And somewhere between those stories, I realized something. People weren't inspired by my revenge. They were comforted by my exposure. 6 months later, the trial began. He walked in wearing the same confidence he'd worn on stage for years, crisp suit, perfect tie, that hollow smile that once convinced investors to trust him. But this time, the cameras weren't flattering him. They were dissecting him. The prosecutor laid out the evidence, every transfer, every offshore document, every signature. And when they showed the letters, the ones I'd once written him in love, I almost couldn't breathe. He had kept them, not as memories, but as leverage. Stored with contracts, annotated like business notes. My emotions, archived as data points. When it was my turn to testify, I looked straight at him. He didn't look away. He wanted me to flinch, to break. But I didn't. Because that was the first time I realized, he wasn't fire. He was ash, pretending to still burn. The court ruled in my favor. A full conviction. Fraud, embezzlement, falsified records. He was sentenced to prison. But as the verdict was read, I didn't feel joy. I felt weight. The kind that comes after carrying too much truth for too long. I moved to the coast that winter. No skyscrapers. No interviews. No boardrooms. Just wind, salt, and silence. Every morning, I walked the same stretch of beach. I'd pick up pieces of driftwood and broken glass, things the ocean had discarded, and line them along the sand. Maybe that's what healing looks like. Not mending what's broken, but understanding why it shattered. Marcus visited once. He said people still wanted to hear from me. A book deal. A documentary. A redemption arc. But I told him. The story doesn't need a sequel. It just needs to rest. He smiled, nodded, and left me with a single sentence. Even silence can change the world, Elena. Maybe he was right. Maybe this is what change sounds like. Quiet, steady, unbroadcasted. I started writing again. Not love letters this time. Reports. Essays. Articles under an alias about power, deception, and how easily people trade integrity for admiration. No one knows it's me. And that's the beauty of it, the freedom to tell the truth without expectation. The empire he built from greed collapsed. But from those ashes, something better took shape. A quiet network of people who refused to be silenced, fooled, or forgotten. They send me stories. I archive them. Protect them. Because sometimes, justice doesn't wear a courtroom robe, it wears persistence. Someone once told me burning things destroys them. But I've learned, sometimes, fire reveals what was hiding in the dark. One night, I found the last letter he ever wrote me. Unopened. Buried at the bottom of a storage box. It said 3 words, "You were right." No apology. No explanation. Just acknowledgement, the smallest spark of honesty from a man who had built an empire on lies. I didn't keep it. I tore it in half, dropped it into the fireplace, and watched it curl into smoke. And as it burned, I whispered, I was right, but I wish I hadn't been. So, that's my story. He burned my letters, so I burned his empire. Not out of vengeance, but because truth deserves oxygen. And lies, they only survive in silence. If my story moved you, if you've ever been made to question your worth, your power, your truth, stay. Subscribe. Share this story. Because there are more voices like mine waiting to be heard. And maybe, together, we'll light a few more matches.